Welcome to Wise Minds, Wild Hearts, the podcast for heart-led high achievers just like you, ready to take inspired action and achieve true alignment. If you're craving deeper influence, greater impact, and a life that genuinely lights you up, you're in the right place. I'm Kip Clark, former academic turned entrepreneur, transformational coach, elite athlete, and shameless fountain pen addict. Here, you'll learn how to leverage the beautiful wisdom of your years with the wild passion that drives you forward. Together, we'll break through those limiting beliefs, unlock the power of your subconscious mind, and create a life that aligns with your soul's desire. Ready to create the kind of impact you've always dreamed of? Let's do this. Hey there, friend. Welcome back. I'm glad you're here because today I'd love to share with you some really fascinating work on change, and specifically the motivation behind change whenever we're recognizing that something's not working the way we want it to in our lives. And there are a couple of common misconceptions about motivation that really aren't helpful, and they include the idea that motivation must precede action. So it's the idea that if you're not feeling motivated, you're not going to be able to take action, or that you either have motivation or you don't. In fact, neither of these ideas is true in any absolute sense, although lots of people believe them and will actually use them as excuses for staying stuck. So in this episode, I'm going to be looking at James Prochaska's stages of change model, and I'm going to break down motivation a little bit more so that we can understand it a little better. And I'm also going to integrate a few insights from some top contemporary thought leaders too. This particular model came out in the mid-1990s, so it's about 30 years ago, a little over that. And in the model, there are 6 distinct stages of change, which appear in a kind of progression. But in reality, it's not uncommon for people to move back and forth through some of the levels. So it's not necessarily a steady upward progression from not wanting to change to being all in on change. It's much more a fluid thing where we may experience real progress in changing one area of our lives, but we might struggle in another area. So, as I said, there's 6 levels in the model, one model. And today I want to look at the first 2 stages of change with you. And those are the pre-contemplation stage and the contemplation stage. Now, it's really, really important to understand these different phases of motivation, because if we attempt to take action before the right foundation is in place for making change, we're just setting ourselves up for a less than desirable outcome. And just before we get into it, I just wanted to let you know I'm going to be talking at times from one or the other of 2 points of view here. One is your own point of view, how you might be experiencing motivation or possibly a lack of motivation for changing something in your life. And the other is the point of view of a coach or a healer or any other role you might be in where you're attempting to help another person who's feeling stuck in some way. So let's get started here. This pre-contemplation stage, this is the one where you might be thinking things like, I don't even see the need for change. I don't need to change. There's nothing wrong. So you might feel unmotivated because you don't perceive a problem, or you might be in denial. So for some people, it's not that they can't see a solution to a problem. It's that they don't recognize the situation as a problem in the first place. So this is the domain of a fixed mindset. It's the idea that a person's abilities, skills, mindset, and so on they're baked in, they're set in stone, they're unchangeable. Now, if you'd like to learn a little bit more about fixed mindsets and growth mindsets, feel free to bop over to episode 17 and check it out. But for now, I want to share with you an example because my late father was a really good example of this. He smoked a pipe. All my life, I remember him smoking a pipe. And when I was young, I was so worried that he was doing this terrible thing to his body, that he was harming his lungs and he was going to die young because he was engaged in this habit. And I tried everything to try and get him to stop. I would hide his pipe. I would pour orange juice in it. I would try and hide his matches, and it never really did anything. He would chuckle and he would, pull out another pipe, or it didn't stop him at all. And I realized after a while that the rewards he was getting for his habit, his smoking habit, they were so much more powerful than any associated health cost to him. And there was also a real ritual around pipe smoking that calmed him, and it made him feel that everything was all right with the world again. So he really had no interest to change. And if you have ever smoked a pipe, or you know someone that has, you may be familiar with that ritual where he would first kind of bang out the used tobacco from the bowl of the pipe, and then he'd kind of clean it out. He'd use a pipe cleaner, and then he'd take his tobacco pouch and he'd take out some of the fresh tobacco and put it in place in the bowl and kind of tamp it down. And then he'd light it and take a few puffs. And all this process would take sometimes several minutes, 5 or 6 minutes. And then when he lit the pipe, he'd only take a couple of puffs and he put the pipe down. So the preparation of it was far more lengthy than the actual smoking of the pipe was. And he would do this repeatedly in the course of a day. So he, as I said, this was a ritual that really, it made him feel grounded, I think. If things were stressful in his life, if he just got out his pipe and kind of went through that ritual, it was I would say, almost a Zen-like thing for him. He just had no interest to change. So for most people that want to stay in the pre-contemplation stage, it's because it's really familiar and it's really comfortable for them, even though it may create negative repercussions. There may be some negative consequences. Familiarity is better than the unknown for a lot of people in this stage. For lots of people, the pain of the unknown feels greater than whatever pain they might have with what they're experiencing now. And unless that ratio changes such that the pain of what they're living now becomes greater than the pain of the unknown, that's some possible future life, future identity, they simply won't change. So what drives change motivation at this stage, the pre-contemplation stage? Well, the short answer is not much. To be honest, there's not much that will change here. So note that for anybody at this stage, it's not that they're lacking motivation, because they're actually highly motivated to keep doing what they're doing. It's that they lack the motivation to change what's not working because they don't see it that way. So they will typically ignore any data or any other information that reveals why making the change is probably necessary for them. They prefer to remain in a kind of willful ignorance rather than really looking at the facts of their choices. So denial is a typical mindset in this stage, and the individual often also blame everything around them. So other people, other circumstances. This is what's known as living at effect in one's life. Life happens to these people rather than they're accepting full responsibility for everything that's in their life, and that is being at cause for everything in their life. So the initial change motivation here would be external, and that's just not compelling enough for many people. The energy is coming from outside them. It's coming from other people or other circumstances. So my wanting my father to quit smoking his pipe, it wasn't motivating enough for him. It had to come from inside him before that change could happen. And this is also why interventions by family and friends for a person who is dealing with an addiction, it rarely works because it's not coming from within the person. Now, with respect to my father, as it turns out, when he was in his early 70s, one day he just decided for himself that he was going to give it up, and he did. And from that day forward, he never smoked a pipe again. He left his pipes on his dresser where he could see them, so they were always there. I think in his mind he thought they're always there. If I really need it, they're there. But he had made the decision, he'd made a commitment. I'm going to come back to that a little bit later on in this episode, the commitment. But he made it, and he was all in on that. And so I was astonished that he actually quit. I never thought he'd get out of that pre-contemplation stage, because for most of his life, he was very firmly nestled in it. But what did make the difference for him and for anybody? Well, at this stage, the pre-contemplation stage, the first process is just to build awareness. So it will take some kind of an emotional trigger, some new understanding that will begin the process. And sometimes life itself presents a powerful impetus for change all on its own. So, for example, again, with a smoking example, if someone's a smoker and that person becomes a parent for the first time, and now he's envisioning walking his daughter down the aisle at her wedding, that could become a compelling enough future vision for this new father to want to change an unhealthy lifestyle choice today and to give up smoking. So that external factor, becoming a father, generated the internal motivation for that change to happen. So when do things start to shift out of this first phase, the pre-contemplation stage? Well, as lots of people like to say, all progress begins by telling the truth. So it's important to really look at what is the behavior, what is it that's going on that needs changing, and what are the actual implications on you and on those all around you. Now, at this point, I do think it's important to say that some of this work may actually be better addressed by a licensed therapist or a psychiatrist. So if you are a coach or an energy worker of some kind, it's possible that a person dealing with a deeply entrenched view about something or a negative habit, that person would be better served at first by doing work with a trained therapist. I'm very, very clear that I'm a coach. I'm not a therapist. And so my job is not to dig into someone's past, to uncover deep wounds or traumas that have contributed to the current issue. Not in the way a therapist does. My job is to help clients develop a vivid future vision. It's forward-looking. The work I do with clients is very much forward-looking, and then to support that person in bringing the vision to life. So these are very different skill sets. And I know, for example, I am not best suited for working with someone who's in these early stages of change, a pre-contemplation stage or contemplation stage. It's not where my strengths are. Other people are very good at that. And again, for some people, a therapist is a much, much better first step than working with a coach. Now, 3 questions that Prochaska asks, and he says these will help a person determine if he or she is open to change. So the first question is the person actually willing to talk about any problematic habits or behaviors with others? Most people in the pre-contemplation stage will just refuse to discuss what's going on. They don't want to talk about it. They don't see it as a problem. They just want you to, bugger off and stop nagging them. And they will perceive, you're questioning them or asking them about it as nagging. And nagging at the pre-contemplation stage, or even encouraging or urging, whatever term you want to use, it just rarely works. Another question to ask is, are you well informed about your behavior? So if you're ignoring clear information, clear data that shows that continuing with these behaviors or these actions is going to create even bigger problems down the road, refusing to see the impact of your choices on those around you, or blaming everybody else for the results you have in your life, well, chances are you're definitely in denial. You're not well informed about the behavior, or you're just ignoring it. And then the third question is, are you willing to be fully responsible for the consequences of your actions? Again, someone deeply entrenched in the pre-contemplation stage is probably they're not going to express it as being responsible for the consequences of their actions because they don't see it as a problem typically. So can you predict how others will be impacted? That's a question to ask. Have you thought through the short and long-term consequences of your actions? So again, people in this stage can be hard to coach. They can be really hard. But Michael Bungay Stanier has this, he's got a coaching model. I love it. It's about asking questions and being curious. And he says staying curious longer is really, really powerful. So initially, a question to ask might be like a what if question. So all you want to do, all I would be trying to do with someone who is in this phase would be to just get their thought processes going in a slightly different direction. So a what if question is a good way of doing that. So it might sound something like, have you ever thought about what it would be like if, and then you help that person begin to see a different future that would only be possible when the current trajectory of their life is interrupted in some way. If we don't change anything, nothing will change. It's a pretty basic kind of formula there. Now, the second phase, the second stage in this model is the contemplation stage. And this is an interesting one because it's where we can begin to acknowledge that something needs to change, but we're not all in on that idea yet. We may not fully see the problem yet, or if we do, we may not understand what's behind it or what we can do to shift it. Now, as a coach, I've learned that this phase is also one in which a person is not yet ready to commit to action of any kind, even when she knows she needs to change, and even when she sees the destination she wants to get to. This stage can last for years, a lifetime even, especially when the person prefers to just think about change rather than actually take action towards achieving it. So a person would say things like, I know I should change, but I'm just not sure how. Or someday I'll make the change, but now's the not right time for me. So I'm happy with where I am. So what's happening here? Well, again, the motivation is high and low, curiously. So you may recognize the need for change, but you may be overwhelmed or unsure of how to make that happen. So unlike people in the pre-contemplation stage, people in the contemplation stage will actually enjoy talking about their problem or the situation. They're just not ready to take action, but they'll love to talk about it. And if you want to talk about it with them, they'll be happy to talk all day long about it. And like those in the first stage, the contemplators also are not typically ready to give up the familiar, even when they see that it isn't serving them. So this is a shift from that first stage. In the contemplation stage, we can see that there's something that's not working here. So the inner desire for change is matched by, it's almost like an unwitting resistance to it at the same time. So this is a scenario with having one foot on the gas and one foot on the brake at the same time. Now, if you're a coach, if you're an energy worker, understand that someone at this stage will feel that taking action to make the necessary changes can be akin to a kind of death in their mind. The emotions can be very, very strong here. We can't underestimate the hold this fear will have on them because they're being asked to face a whole new identity, and that's scary for lots of people. And for anybody who has a need to explore and understand every nuance of an issue, they can remain stuck on contemplation forever. They'll use thinking and exploring about it as a way of convincing themselves they're being productive and making progress on it, but in fact, it's like they're running on the spot. There's no genuine forward momentum. And this is also the phase in which a kind of magical thinking can occur. So you may even have experienced this yourself if you've ever had a thought like, well, someday when X happens or when Y occurs, then I'll be able to make this change. Or you may even have considered what is an impossible outcome, like, well, I wish I could eat all the donuts I want and not gain weight. Well, that's not going to happen. So what drives motivation at this stage? Well, again, if we push too hard for someone to make a change before they're ready, we're going to set them up for failure. our nagging, and again, it's how that kind of intervention can be perceived, it's going to create a kind of negative motivation in that the person may become even more willfully unwilling to make changes. So what's needed instead is to start laying out a solid foundation upon which to build out the next stages for change. And this happens when we help the person understand the patterns that are showing up, the patterns she's exhibiting, and why those patterns show up when they do. So understanding should precede action. That's how lasting change and transformation happens. So motivation doesn't have to precede action necessarily, but understanding really does. If we attempt to get somebody into action before he has even a basic understanding of his patterns, the odds for success go way down. So this doesn't have to be a long process either. If the person is genuinely contemplating change, even a subtle shift in understanding can go a long way towards being able to generate the motivation that's needed. And here, of course, the work of a coach is to help that person develop a clear future vision. Without clarity about where we're going, we get stuck in analysis paralysis. And again, we can help by asking good questions that guide the client in creating a future life that's so compelling, so exciting, so desirable. The client wants to start making the necessary changes. That comes from inside. Now, as I've talked about in previous episode, transformation happens when we commit to a bigger future vision rather than to mere incremental improvement. And this isn't a technique that works with everybody, but for us high achievers, it can be golden. So not knowing how to make a really big goal happen forces us to look at everything we're doing now and offloading or eliminating up to 80% of it so that we create the space for the as yet unknown new ways of being and doing to come in. And if you haven't already listened to them, check out episodes 21 and 22, in which I go into much more detail about this specific powerful process. Now, here again, Michael Bungay Stanier's beautiful perspective about staying curious longer helps to minimize the emotional charge. So if this is you, if you're in this contemplation stage, the feelings that you may be having about making the change can be a little overwhelming. But being curious about it helps to shift the focus onto a much more productive view of yourself and the issue at hand. So instead of asking, should I change or can I change? A better question, a more powerful question is, who am I becoming now? Who do I want to be? This future forward curiosity is so much more helpful for making change, but it's also useful and empowering to take stock of how far you've come. So look at where you were 6 months ago, a year ago, 3 years ago, and so on. Hopefully you're going to see the incredible changes you've already made in various aspects of your life. And yes, there could still be this one area where you're kind of feeling like maybe you're even going backwards in terms of change. That's okay, because when you can see some positive changes you've made in certain areas of your life, that in turn can help motivate you for the next change that's needed. And remember, time is a tool. So your future self, using your future self as a tool to see what's possible for how you can live today, and using your past self to see how far you've already come, that can create phenomenal levels of motivation. The contemplation stage, this second stage in the model, it's all about commitment here. And commitment is the first step for true and lasting change. Commitment takes courage because there's often fear associated with thinking about making a change, and courage is what allows you to move forward even when the fear is there. So as you gradually develop forward momentum, you'll develop greater competence, capability with this new way of being and doing. And that increased competence will naturally build out confidence. So it's this gorgeous upward spiral of elevated energy that builds on itself and starts to infuse other areas of your life too. Okay, phew, that was a lot today. I've talked about these first two stages from the change model, the pre-contemplation and the contemplation stage. Next time, I'm going to look into the next two phases in the model, so be sure to tune in again when that episode drops. You've got this, my friend. All right, my friends, that's it for this episode. If this has been helpful to you, let me know. I love to hear about all the positive changes you're making in your life. And if there's someone you know who might benefit from hearing this message, please share the love, my friend. See you next time on Wise Minds, Wild Hearts.